All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Lindsay Elder from the Office of the Chief of Public Affairs. We have our panel today of the Honorable Christine Wormuth, Secretary of the Army, General Randy George, the Chief of Staff of the Army, and the Sergeant Major of the Army, Michael Weimer. We begin today's event with our panel having an opportunity to provide opening remarks, and then we will open it up for questions. Please wait for me to call on you. We have 2 microphones that will be moving around the room, and please wait for those before asking for our live stream and transcription of this event. We are pressed for time, so questions will be limited to 1 and a follow-on, and please direct your question towards one of our panelists, not all 3. When asking your questions, please lead off with your name and organization, and I will now turn it off to our panel for any opening remarks. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. It's great to see you all again this year, and I'm glad that since last year's AUSA, we've had more opportunities to talk with you all, over the course of the past 12 months. I'm going to keep my remarks very short because obviously I just gave my keynote. I do want to express my sympathies for the Israeli people. What happened this past weekend is terrible and quite shocking. As Secretary Austin said, the Department of Defense will be providing support and resources to the Israeli Defense Forces. I would ask, however, that you save your questions about the details of that for our colleagues in the Office of Secretary of Defense. We are the Title X folks. We are not in the Situation Room. In terms of my speech, for those of you who might not have been able to attend it, I really tried to emphasize the theme of the need for the Army to innovate and transform. And I tried to draw on the period between World War I and World War II as an example of a time in the past when the United States Army really made some important strides in innovation. And I hope that we're not in an interwar period now, but you never know. And I think it's our responsibility as leaders to make sure that we are innovating in terms of our modernization programs, innovating in terms of our force structure, and frankly, reinventing how we recruit, since our recruitment efforts are the foundation of the Army House. And a lot of you, did a nice job, thank you, covering our announcements about how we're going to reinvent recruiting in the future. The other thing I tried to emphasize is the importance of our partnership with both Congress and industry in that innovation and transformation effort. We can't do what we need to do without help from Congress and support, obviously, from industry. So with that, I'll turn it over to our new Chief of Staff.
Okay, thanks, Secretary. Only thing I'll add on for Israel, and our thoughts are with the families that suffered and lost lives in the terrorist attacks in Israel. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be up here with my teammates. And obviously my first AUSA press conference. So a couple of things I just want to say up front is how proud I am of our Army. And just over the last 60 days, I've had an opportunity. I've been out at 1st Armored Division, been out seen the CTC rotation at the National Training Center, over with 2nd Cavalry Regiment, and several units stopped off and seen AFRICOM. Really everywhere I've been impressed with what our troopers are doing, and we're very busy. And I've heard that out there, but on the very positive side, it just goes to show you how much I think people appreciate what the Army is doing around the world for the Joint Force, and I'm how proud of our soldiers that we all are over there operating. And then I just got back from Indo-Pacific Army Chiefs Conference, and had 20 Army chiefs over there, and it was pretty much the same thing. Everybody wanted to do more with the U.S. Army. I know there's a lot of water out in the Indo-Pacific, but there's a lot of people living on the land out there that want to have a lot to do with the U.S. Army. So, innovating with us, training with us, exercising with us, and really proud of what our folks are doing out in USAPAC. And then very proud of what we're doing, our support to Ukraine, and continued support to Ukraine here over the last couple of years. So tomorrow you'll hear when I go over to the Eisenhower lunch, and I've talked to a couple of you about the 4 focus areas that I'm putting out, and I've been talking to the 4-star commanders. The Secretary and I both have the number one purpose, the purpose of our Army, is to make sure that we can defend our country. And our motto has been, "This will defend," since 1776, and that's what everybody expects our Army to be able to do to be absolute experts at our warfighting mission. And so I will have an incredible focus on that and making sure that we can do that. But to be lethal and to be prepared at your warfighting mission, you have to have cohesive teams. So that's the first. And what I have instructed commanders, and I just was talking at a solarium this morning, had about 100 captains, lieutenants, warrant officers, first sergeants, platoon sergeants, and was talking to them about that and asking them for some feedback on how we can stop doing things that don't contribute to lethality and building cohesive teams. And I think that's something that we have to constantly review. The second is delivering ready combat formations. And ready formations mean that you have ready families, first and foremost, and making sure. And I've been through several deployments and making sure, and I've been blessed with a strong combat multiplier in my family and my wife, and making sure that we're doing the same things to make sure that we have that out inside of our formations. And one of the things I think you're going to see here that the Secretary and I tasked everybody to do was to develop an app that they could have information. The Army has a lot of programs, OSD. We have a lot of programs, and we have to give them the ability to access all of those programs and know exactly how to find them. The other thing on delivering ready combat formations is magazine depth, and I'm sure there'll be questions to talk about that, but to making sure that we are putting a lot of effort into our industrial base. And then the other aspect of delivering combat-ready formations is maintenance, and I'm willing to look forward to talking. Anybody has any questions about that? The third area is continuous transformation, and the Secretary talked about that a lot in her speech. And I know that the world has changed more here in the last couple of years. We can't wait for 40 years. This is something, that's why we talk about continuous transformation as something that we're going to have to do. And continuous transformation is not just equipment. It's about making sure that your education is changed, to make sure you're training people for the new environments that they're in, both at units and then professional military education. And then what do we need to do to adapt our acquisition processes to make sure that we're doing things quicker. And then finally, a focus, and I think this is the foundation to everything, is strengthening our profession. And discipline is the foundation of any good unit, I would say of any service in combat, in peacetime. Discipline is critically important. And so just to the focus, and I've heard that even with the junior leaders this morning, a focus on discipline standards which they appreciate. The other thing that we've rolled out here recently is called the Harding Project, and looking at getting people talking more about our profession and sharing and doing that in a way that will be on their tablets or phones where we can have a professional discussion. Most good ideas come from the bottom up, and we realize that, and we want to harness that energy inside of our formation. So real honor to be with you all, and I look forward to your questions.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It's good to see everybody. Good to see some familiar faces, and those that I don't know. It'll be good to get to know you a little bit more. Super honored to be here, be a part of this team. Kicked it off yesterday with a 10-miler. That is definitely a good way to kick off AUSA. But after, it's been about 60 days-ish, and really been hitting the ground and getting out there, from Alaska to Bliss to Irwin to Moore to Poland. I even made a trip up to support my counterpart in Canada for some initiatives that he has that are similar to us. And so it's been a very informative 60 days. During that time, I've been able to have some amazing conversations, from soldiers to junior NCOs to senior NCOs to field grade officers and all in between. It's been very, very great to see how they're focusing on the 4 focus areas the Chief alluded to and the Secretary's principles. But we've also been able to have candid conversations about some of the things that we're struggling on. So I'm learning quickly the importance for me to get out and absolutely talk to soldiers and their families. I'm also very blessed, my spouse Kimberly, that's been able to travel with me, and she's been out there engaged, fully engaged with families, and been able to have those candid conversations also. So really look forward to our engagements and your questions. Thank you.
Tara Kopp. Just wait, pause for the mic.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for doing this. This is Tara Kopp with the Associated Press. First, for General George, you were just talking about the magazine depth, and I wanted to ask specifically about the 155s. It looks like Israel's military might do a ground invasion. Are you concerned that this puts additional pressure if those munitions are requested on your production lines for 155s or other munitions? And then for Secretary Wormuth, I wanted to know about the status of the 2 Iron Domes, if they're still in use, or if there's any consideration to potentially providing those back to Israel.
Tara, first I would say I think we have recognized here for quite some time that, we need to get after building up our industrial base and making sure that we have magazine depth, I think we were both using that term. So I'm confident of where we're going with our 155, and we're actually involved in process right now to determine what we need to provide to our partners, to Israel, and confident that we'll be able to provide them, what they've asked for. Yeah, go ahead. Sure. Yes, I would, of course. The situation, I don't know if this is additional pressure we have realized for quite some time that we need to, get after increasing our magazine depth, and we're in the process of doing that. Really proud of what Doug Bush and our ASALT team have been working this, and with the multi-year procurements, and I'm sure you're very familiar with what, kind of where we're headed and the trajectory we're heading in a very quick way with 155, for example. So I think we will continue to press on that.
Tara, I don't have anything to report on the 2 Iron Domes. I think what I would say is we're obviously at the early stage of the process of evaluating, our ability to support what the IDF needs. And just as we have with Ukraine, we're going to weigh, obviously, the impacts of request to our readiness. But I would argue that just as we've leaned forward with Ukraine, I think, the intent is to lean forward in support of Israel. And, one thing that is really important in terms of the munitions in particular and our ability to support both potentially the Israelis and the Ukrainians simultaneously is additional funding from Congress to be able to increase our capacity, in terms of our capacity to expand production and then to also pay for the munitions themselves. We need additional support from Congress, so I hope we'll see that soon.
Dan Shear.
Hi, Dan Shear from Inside Defense. General George, my question's for you. You talked at the Maneuver Warfighter Summit a month or so ago about getting rid of excess equipment and formations, and I think I've read that you are trying to start a pilot program and are trying to sort of eliminate equipment that's obsolete or not relevant. Could you maybe just expand on that a little bit more in terms of what the pilot program will entail and what types of equipment specifically you're intending to sort of eliminate from those formations?
Sure. So we're actually going to get this going at 2 different installations. So one will be at Liberty. So we picked 2 different unit types. So the first is down in the 82nd. The other will be with 3rd ID. And we have put somebody who came out of Division Command specifically on this mission. So overall, it will be kind of led by General Pappas and General Hamilton. So that's the Force Com Commander, the Army Material Command Commander. And I've given them 90 days. Really, the Secretary and I just took a back brief on this here about 3 or 4 weeks ago to get rid of excess equipment. So I can tell you it was one of the when I was a division commander, there is equipment, one that's excess that you don't need. Let's say it's extra vehicles that are left on there. And then the other is to kind of review our MTO and make sure that all the things that we've had through the years that has slowly been added to property books that we don't necessarily need, that we wouldn't need in a fight going forward, that we're taking that off of the plate. So I think it'll depend on type of unit, and I can come back to you with specifics, but I think in some cases it'll be fairly substantial on the amount of equipment that I think we can reduce. We bought different radios through the years and brought on newer radios and still have some of that stuff on our property book. So it's what we maintain. The goal here is to reduce the complexity for our company commanders and, you know, our units that are out there, that they're not dragging this extra equipment around.
What would be done with the old equipment?
So yeah, well, what has kind of kept us in the past from going through that is figuring that out. So I will tell you what we're going to do initially is that we're just going to basically bring it into a warehouse, and then we're going to I don't want the company commanders and first sergeants to try to figure that out. We're going to pull it out, and then we're going to figure that out with our logistics experts, and there's nobody in the world than Army Material Command, and then they'll figure that out. So some of it we may not need. It may be turn it in. Some of it we'll bring up to standard and store it for future use. So I think it depends. Some of it we may use for parts. So I think we still have to go through that, and we're willing to, you know, love to kind of bring you on that journey with us.
Ashley Roki, Breaking Defense.
Hi. General, I wanted to ask the operating concept. It sounds like General Rainey has finished that and turned that into you. Sort of what changes are you looking at how the Army will operate, and when will you sort of, you know, roll this out? And then on Israel, any concerns? You know, you're moving to a different type of fight, not, you know, into the Indo-Pacific. Any pause or, you know, a relook after what's happened this weekend?
Well, first, I would say, Ashley, is that we always, and just had all the leaders in last week, is that our Army is a global Army. It's one thing we always talk about. You know, we're going to have to be able to operate wherever we're called, whether it's in Europe or the Pacific. And I think that has to kind of be a guiding principle for us. And obviously, we're going to have different capabilities based on different fights. I'd say overall, the big things that we're looking at, and you can go through, and I did this down at the Maneuver Warfighting Conference, which all the things that have changed on the battlefield here just in the last couple of years, what we've learned from what's happened in Ukraine. What our big focus is, and I'll use the network to give you one example, is we need to reduce the complexity, I think, at our formations and bring that complexity up. And I think that, and I know industry is going to help us a bunch with that, and we're talking specifically with the network to make our formations leaner, more mobile, lower signature on the battlefield. And I gave an example when I was just talking to all the captains and first sergeants and warrant officers this morning. We just had 2nd Cavalry Regiment was over in an exercise and had 5 Stryker vehicles that were physically dispersed yet digitally connected, and they were commanding and controlling 5,000 people that were operating. And that's where I think that we have to go. We have to adapt to what the battlefield conditions are, how things are changing. I could talk about unmanned systems. We're going to look at human-machine integration and what that does. Some of that came up this morning, and the Secretary was talking about it. So we're looking at that overall, and that we're planning on that being a big discussion, and we're going to get the leaders together in December.
Tony? Well, listen, wait for the mic. Thank you.
Tony Capacity with Bloomberg. One specific question and one Ukraine question. What is the status of getting basing privileges for the multi-domain task force? You've talked about it's a State Department issue, but it was formed like 3 years ago. Any progress actually getting permission from Japan or the Philippines to actually let them base there as opposed to train and run in and out? And for General George, the M1 tank, Ukraine, all 31 are apparently there. Can you broadly talk about the concept of operation, the sustainment concept that's been set up there in terms of the complex refueling and ammunition issues? And do those tanks have the active protection system that the United States Army's tanks have?
So Tony, on the MDTFs, we are not yet there to a point where the Philippines or Japan have given us permission to, base the multi-domain task force there. And as I've said in other forums, that's a decision that obviously is a sovereign one, and our host nation allies have got to decide that for themselves. That said, we have sent the MDTF to the Philippines for exercises. We are talking about that vigorously in Army channels with the Japanese. So I think you'll continue to see the MDTF out there in the region as part of the Pacific Pathways series of exercises, but we're not yet to the point of any kind of a basing agreement.
Yeah, on the M1 tank, and just a quick plug for the M1 tank, because I'm a big fan of the M1 tank, and really heard that when I was over at the Indo-Pacific Army Chiefs Conference about Army equipment, U.S. equipment really in general, and just how well it works. So I'm not going to talk about specific capabilities that we put into country. I will tell you that the maintenance, and I went over there and saw what we're doing on the backside as far as making sure that there's a parts flow that can support them. What I was super impressed with is what we're doing now, the ingenuity, I'd say, on both sides of the Ukraine and us connecting with them as far as doing telemaintenance. Being able to see, what's going on, as like 777s is one example. Things that we typically had done where we would pull something all the way back to maybe the depot level. Those kind of repairs now are happening, on the front lines. And so we're learning a lot of lessons. I mentioned earlier all the things that we could, that you could add to that. And I think that in maintenance is one of those things, in logistics in general. And we stood up, should be operational here, fully operational here soon, a contested logistics cross-functional team, just to make sure that we are capturing those and figuring out how we're going to operationalize those, not just in Europe, but really globally.
So telemaintenance from like General Dynamics or your armor school via laptop, say I'd like your laptop, and they can...
Exactly. Yep.
Thanks.
Davis.
Hi, Davis Winkie, Army Times. Madam Secretary, you compared today's Army to the interwar U.S. Army, and your active duty force right now is actually the smallest it's been within strength since that period. And at the same time, you have an Army that is doing more overseas than it was when it had more soldiers in recent years. And Sergeant Major Weimer, in a conversation with me, brought up an op-tempo measurement concept called head-on-pillow time that captures deployments, rotations, field time at home station. And op-tempo is a really big concern given the declining end strength and steady requirements. Does the Army have the ability to really capture and understand that head-on-pillow time for soldiers? And is developing that capability something that y'all are going to put into play from the top down as part of quality of life measures?
Yeah, I think, Davis, of course we want to understand the op-tempo as accurately as possible we can for our soldiers. SMA and I have not had the opportunity to talk in depth about this and about head-to-pillow, but I've certainly heard those kinds of concerns from soldiers when I've been out and about. I know when I was at Fort Riley recently, I heard about that. I think part of what's driving our op-tempo right now being basically about the same as it was during the global war on terrorism is exercises, like Pacific Pathways. And I think it's very important that we have the Army out there in theater showing what it can do, showing how it can operate with allies and partners. That's important to deterrence. But we do need to keep our eye on that because we don't want to run our soldiers into the ground. So I think as part of our emphasis on making the Army more data-centric, we're going to be looking for how can we track more finely those kinds of measurements. And it's something I look forward to exploring with SMA and the Chief.
Can I comment on that? I can't help myself. And I've been in, more into formations than I have been here in the Pentagon. And I will tell you that one of my biggest frustrations, and I just again was talking to all the captains and first sergeants about it this morning, was the aspect of predictability. So the thing that frustrates, that whenever we've gone out and they're part of exercises, they love going and doing their Army mission. What people don't like to do are that one, they like to know kind of what they're doing, have some level of predictability. I'm no different, you're no different, you like predictability. And then they don't like to do things that they don't think contributes to, again, what it is that is going to help them with their mission. So I mentioned the excess equipment, which I'm hoping will help. So when you're back, you have less time. We're just put out on maintenance. We're servicing our vehicles too much. This is the bottom line. We got all the CW5s together across the Army, maintenance warrants, and by making some very simple common sense changes, it's going to reduce the workload by 632 man years. That's a lot of man years. So I think there's things like that we can do, but the big thing is training management, and part of training management is saying no. I mean, okay, and that needs to happen at every level. And there are certain things we're going to respond to in the world, but I think if we can get rid of some of the things that bother folks, tech is another example. If tech doesn't enable you, because everybody's enamored with tech, but if it's something that makes it more, you have to input in a whole bunch of different systems, then that's problematic as well.
But what are the levels at which your junior leaders are empowered to say no? Because the company commanders who have everything roll downhill to them have to say no to the raider who's going to sign their eval.
Yeah, so again, that's part of, I think, training management and deciding what you're going to do at every level. You have leaders at every level that do that. I've grown up in that system, and I know you've been out there and doing that, and I'm confident that that's working in some areas, and I think we need to have to make sure that it's working across the board.
Steve?
Steve Bain at military.com. So, Madam Secretary, you guys are working on asking Congress for a bunch of money for barracks. Is there anything the Army is working on in terms of policy or hiring of DPW teams to take care of these hypothetically new and renovated barracks? Why should Congress give the Army a bunch of money when it seems to not be able to take care of what it already has?
Yeah, I think, Steve, we are doing a number of things to improve our barracks oversight. So for example, we're having a summit later this month that's going to be looking at essentially, barracks management, barracks oversight. How can we improve that? We are looking at how can we hire more DPW people. Frankly, when the Army was coming out of sequestration and we were very focused on readiness, and frankly, Congress was telling us to cut down on civilians, that's one of the places where the Army took cuts. And I think part of the reason that the DPWs at so many garrisons are small is because that was a place where we had reductions. So we're looking at, do we need to invest more there? Can we hire more there? But a big piece of the challenge is just sheer funding for additional barracks, MILCON renovation, and sustainment. And we've been working hard as we put together the FY25 budget to see what we can do. I think, it is going to be a longer term project with Congress, however, because with the top line that the Army has, we can't in the next 2 years go and do everything we need to do to fix barracks.
And this ties into op-tempo as well. This all boils into how well soldiers feel about serving. The Army put together suicide prevention policy that came out in August. I couldn't find anyone in the Army to say it was good. It didn't seem to have any teeth to it or anything like new or tangible. Is that it with suicide prevention? Is there anything new coming down the pipe or any other efforts to remedy the issue?
Yeah, I think, having a suicide prevention regulation is important. It puts, a policy in place that is based on CDC public health approach, and it brings together all in one document all of the different programs that the Army has. And we built guidebooks for battalion commanders, brigade commanders to help them, understand that regulation. But at the end of the day, I think what's more important than a regulation are the programs that we've put in place. Things like lethal means safety. Sadly, the primary way people take their own lives is with handguns. So talking to our soldiers about lethal means safety, really important. The Ask, Care, Escort program, really important. Health and holistic fitness. We've seen some positive correlations between that program and reduced harmful behaviors. So I think it's really the programs and then our leaders being engaged and all the way down to the squad level, encouraging our leaders to know their soldiers. That's going to get us farther than I think a suicide prevention regulation will.
Thank you.
And just to add on that, I mean, that regulation was catching up with things we were already doing. I mean, when I take a look at, like, I just visited the People First Center down at Fort Cavazos, and I literally looked at what we're now calling, the Ask Care Escort, the ACE program that came out. It's underneath that new regulation with the delivering the modular and interactive scenario-based training. I mean, we're doing that, and this regulation codified that, and now make sure it's happening across all the formations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this. First, Secretary Wormuth, have y'all determined which specific systems the Army will contribute for the new replicator initiative? Which ones, and can you share a little bit more about the vision for that? And General George, can you please expand on the app that you mentioned that y'all are developing? I'd like to hear how far you are in that development. When is it going to be released? What sort of impact are you envisioning that it'll have on personnel?
Okay.
Ma'am, can you include your name and...
Oh, and I'm Brandy Benson from Defense Scoop.
Thank you.
There we go. I was trying to read it.
So on Replicator, that's a very new initiative, as you know, that Deputy Secretary Hicks just announced. So we're still exploring how the Army can fit into that. I do think that we have a number of areas that would be ripe for Replicator. That would include, UAVs of all sizes. As I said in my keynote, obviously UAVs, both using them as sensors, as deliverers of payloads, and then also defending against them is key on the battlefield. So small or UAVs of all sizes. I think also some of the loitering munitions that we have could be candidates for Replicator. And then finally, perhaps some of our ground robots. But we're still in dialogue with OSD on that.
Okay, the app, and again, I mentioned that the Secretary and I said, hey, we want to make sure we can communicate with our soldiers and families. So we've asked the software factory, this is part of Army Futures Command. They've been working on it, two captains, I think, James and Tavia, who've been kind of leading this effort. And they've probably been working on it for about the last 2 weeks. They've been making updates. So right now they've been focused on Fort Cavazos. And I would describe this as what they're doing is really developing the requirements for the kind of app that we really need. And so we got a bunch of spouses together. They're actually it's going to be here at the forum. I will make sure that somebody from my team finds you the QR code so that you can go on there. But the idea is that what you want is, if you're going to go, and I've been the new person that's going to an installation, that you can find, here's how you get in the gate, here's when the gym's open, here's where the CDC's at. And you can click right inside the app and get immediate directions inside the app. And you can, it's connected in ways that you'll find out which gate has too much traffic. And, that's usually an issue. So what we're trying to do is do things that will help improve the lives of our soldiers and families. And a big part of that is also making sure that people that are welcome to a new installation. I remember going to a new installation, many years ago, and it's daunting, to show up there. And so we just want to make sure that they have they have access to the resources so they can thrive.
Important piece of that too, that the chief is set for the team as a goal, is to make sure that has enough flexibility to adjust to the requirements of that installation. Because one of the pieces we've noticed and the feedback we've received is, what works at Fort Wainwright is a little different than Irwin, Johnson, Wiesbaden. And so those garrison command teams, those senior mission commands out there have the ability to make that app unique to their needs at that location. And that's something we're going to make sure we create.
Hi, Matt Baynard, Defense Daily. For Secretary Wormuth, what is your level of concern right now with the uncertain status of final FY24 appropriations? Now under a CR and with no Speaker of the House currently in place, and what are some specific impacts you would point to having to operate under a continued longer-term CR and then potentially even the 1% across-the-board cut if there are no spending bills in place by January 1? Thank you.
I'm definitely concerned about the lack of funding. as I said in my keynote remarks, we're staring down the barrel of another potential government shutdown in just a few weeks. So, I would say, sadly, the United States Army and DoD has gotten used to operating under CRs for the last, several years. And so, the impacts of the CR in the short term, you'll obviously see some inability on our part to start some new start programs. There are some impacts on some R&D programs. And basically, the longer a CR goes on, the more profound those become. I don't have specific examples off the top of my head right now for a long-term CR, but we can get those for you. We do track them and try to keep them handy because obviously we want members of Congress to understand the problems. But the lack of, frankly, predictability around our budget is a huge problem, particularly in light of the incredibly challenging security environment we're in, where we're doing everything we're doing in Ukraine. We're working to keep up with the pacing challenge of China. Now we see what's happening in Israel. Having predictable funding would help a lot.
Okay.
Hi, I think this is a question for Secretary Wormuth. I'm Meredith Roten with Janes, and I wanted to ask about now that the 24 technologies in the hands of soldiers by 23, that deadline has come and gone. I was wondering, what are you thinking about lessons learned from that program, especially, or that effort, especially as you're looking at the Army of 2040? Is that something that you would try to replicate again for future milestones in setting that kind of tone of all those capabilities coming in at one time?
I certainly think there are a lot of things we've done differently in the area of acquisition, in the area of, I would say, setting requirements, pursuing innovation, and pursuing our acquisition programs. We've done a lot differently since we created Army Futures Command, and I would largely keep all of those things. I think going forward, looking past the 24 and 23 that we've been focused on. I think, maximizing use of more flexible authorities from Congress, things like OTA, using our office, the Rapid Critical Technologies Office, for example. All of that, I think, has been quite successful. The cross-functional teams, General George mentioned that Jim Rainey has created a new contested logistics cross-functional team. Say that 3 times fast. All of that, I think, has been quite successful. I read with interest I think it was National Defense Magazine sort of scorecard of the 24 and 23, and thought we got some pretty good grades. So I think that's a good sign, particularly when you contrast it with sort of the Army's track record with things like Future Combat System or Command, for example.
Would you specifically count another, 25 and 26 or something like that?
Not with the budget that we have. We still have to bring, obviously, many of those programs, over the finish line and develop them as programs of record. So I don't see us infusing, a large number of completely new development efforts.
Okay. Patty?
Ken Kreitzer, Canada.
Actually, sir, we're up here.
Hi, I'm Patty Nyberg with Task and Purpose. Kind of the big picture question is to be to the Secretary or General George. We know about the challenges with recruiting, and then kind of a new effort is just human-machine integration. I'm curious how kind of those two coming together are changing force structure. Is it changing the way that you're going to budget, where money's going, kind of big picture, kind of how you're thinking about technology, maybe replacing certain jobs, kind of in that vein?
Yeah, I think a lot of that work is still ahead of us, frankly, and one of the things that I'm excited about with the human-machine integration initiative is that it will help us start understanding that picture and what it really looks like. What are the implications from a manning perspective for our heavy units, for our light units, if we start bringing in robotic vehicles or relying more heavily on AI? There's a lot of work to be done there, I think, before we can really get to a landing place. But that is what General Rainey and General Rash have started, I think, with the human-machine integration effort.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that, and I kind of mentioned it up front, that we have to figure out too how we're going to use this in our people. So I'll give you an example that I think right now you're going to have unmanned, you take a UAS, unmanned aerial system, and what it can do as far as reconnaissance or force protection or those kinds of things that units, a lot of different types of soldiers. This isn't like an infantry soldier or any specifically are going to have to be able to use that, whether you're out in a logistics convoy or those types of things. So as the Secretary mentioned, what we're doing a study in that. We'll do some more of that actually. We're doing a lot of it right now out at NTC, and that's kind of, we can get a lot of turns on those kinds of things. And then when we do Project Convergence, we can continue to look at that and how that's going to change our formation. But I don't think it's going to be in one of these big, oh my gosh, we're here. I think these kinds of things happen over time as technology advances. You learn how to get it inside your formation, and that's kind of what I was talking about with continuous. It's just something that we need to set it in motion, and that's what we're trying to do with our formations, is making sure that we can, get after this, continuously. I'll give you one example where I think things will change a little bit. Like somebody is running the network, or is on signal or communications, and we have a lot of very specific. I think there's like 17 different skill identifiers inside that one branch. And what I think we have to do is simplify things, and that's what I was talking about, moving the complexity up. I can't be, okay, well, I need Smitty to fix this router, and Rodriguez has to fix this router, and George has to fix that router. That's some of that I think that we can do, and that will change as we simplify, I think, some of our tech. And we're seeing that. We have, I think the innovation is out there. We just got to see how it fits inside of our formation. So I think it will affect, but we'll do that over time and after testing and exercising with it.
Ellen?
Hi, Ellen Melheiser with Synopsis. There's a lot of talk about taking care of people, but on installations, there's a basic issue of defects not being open near where the soldiers live in their barracks. I know at JBLM, there's an entire half of the base the soldiers can't walk to the defect. What are y'all doing to address this on an installation basis and across the Army?
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do, different installations have had different challenges. For example, in some cases we've had our cooks deploy to the field or go to exercises and not be available to run the DFACs, for example. That is a little bit like what General George was saying about training management. That is foreseeable. We need to do a better job of planning for that. In other cases, where we have food being provided by contractors, we had folks go on strike, for example, at Fort Knox for our cadet training. And we were actually able to respond very, very quickly to that and get alternatives in place. But I think some of this is we need to really make sure that our garrison commanders are working together with senior commanders and trying to foresee as many challenges and plan ahead. I don't know if either SMA or Chief wants to add to that.
I can add that was, again, one of the areas that the Secretary and I asked to kind of get a back brief on that we're taking a look at. Another aspect that we have been working on this, and we dealt with this down at Fort Cavazos, and it was the same thing, and I'm very familiar with Joint Base Lewis McChord, is the other thing, too, is public transportation. I think that, we got to get after that's on there, and bus routes and those kinds of things. So there's a lot of different ways to get after this. Every installation is going to be a little bit different, and we just got to, push things down enough so that people can solve the problem at their level, give them the resources they need.
That's the key piece. If you've seen one installation, you've seen one installation. They're all unique and have a little bit different way to skin the cat, and making sure that those senior commanders and those command teams down there have that ability. That's what we're taking a hard look at.
Okay. And last question to you, sir. Right, yep. Use the microphone, please. Thank you.
Hi, Ken Kreitzer, CamVets Media. Thank you all for your service to our country, first off. On a little bit impact of climate change, in Hudson Valley, in July, there was an 8-inch rainstorm that incurred $111 million of damage at West Point. There was concern from the Board of Visitors on just finding the appropriations to do those repairs to roads, buildings, housing, and also how military families can be taken care of when a natural disaster impacts them when they're on a base. It seems like it's happening more often.
Yes, I think we've all seen in the last several months the effects of extreme weather across the country. And, you know, we saw it at West Point with the floods. We've seen it in other places. This is one of the reasons why, you know, our climate strategy has 3 lines of effort, and one of them is focused around installations and making our installations more resilient. And that resiliency can occur in a number of different ways. But we're also looking at, you know, when it comes to future MilCon, how can we do that? How can we build structures in such a way to make them more resilient against drought, against rain, hurricanes, all of that? And, you know, I think it's something that we're going to have to continue investing in because extreme weather is very, very real. I will say, you know, I think the Army has a very good track record of taking care of its soldiers and families in those kinds of instances. You know, we moved quickly to support West Point, and when you think of the impacts at Red Hill, for example, you know, the Army moved very quickly to move families out of affected homes at that time and get them into hotels. And we will continue to do that when we have those kinds of crises.
Thank you very much to everyone on our panel, and I would ask if everyone would please remain in place for just a moment while they depart. We want to thank everyone again for your attendance today. If you need any more assistance, the Media Operations Center is located in room 103 Bravo, and we can help you either with requests for one-on-one engagements or to link you up with an organization that might be best equipped to your interests. So, thank you very much.